Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. The morning show continues. My pleasure now hosting the second part of the show this morning. And thanks to my colleagues from the BCCI for carrying on the show since 6:30 this morning. As I mentioned to you earlier today, we'll be, of course, talking about education and the changes occurring. And Galen University is in the forefront when it comes to being progressive and changing things and making them relative and timely on what's going on in our country. In the studios with me, Mr. Dorian Barrow, who's the Dean Faculty of Education at Galen, and Dr. Noemi Waite, and she's the, well, Galen is having a STEM workshop. We'll find out about that shortly. And to facilitate that is Dr. Noemi Waite, and she comes to us from Buffalo University in New York. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Ernesto, and thanks for offering us this opportunity to share with you and with the nation another way in which Galen is working with the Ministry of Education in advancing the agenda of educational development in Belize. The last time we were here, we spoke about competency-based education, which is a major initiative of the Ministry of Education. Another one of their initiative, and one that is long overdue, is introducing STEM education in schools. STEM education in schools. Now, STEM is an acronym, STEM, is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. You may have heard recently the CEO in the Ministry of Education and the Minister opening a center right across from where the old technical high school used to be, that they're calling a STEAM Academy, a STEAM Academy. STEAM is just an A added to STEM, and
which is arts, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Well, Dr. Waite, who is a specialist on what she calls STEM arts education, or STEM agricultural education, or STEM sports education, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the idea is, and I think it's a very, very, very important initiative of the government, and we are fully endorsing it. We are fully working with them in trying to actualize it. The idea is that we want students in Belize to begin to think very, very early about STEM careers. STEM careers. Dr. Osman Martinez, the CEO in the Ministry of Economic Development and a former faculty member at Galen University, did a recent study in which he found that of the people who are currently in the workforce in Belize, who have associate degrees, bachelor's degrees, and master's degrees, 84% of them had those degrees in business.
Yeah.
84% of them had those degrees in business. And this is not an indictment, I guess, on business. As a matter of fact, we in a way should celebrate that because the business curriculum, especially the business administration curriculum, is one of the most successful curriculum. But we need to get more of our citizens, right, to be thinking about careers other than business, to think about careers in science, to think about careers in technology, to think about careers in engineering, to think about careers in mathematics. And this initiative, the STEM initiative in schools, is to try and start that process with these kids from very, very, very early. And of course, we at Galen, we work with teachers, the Faculty of Education work with teachers. And we believe that for a STEM initiative to be successful in Belize, it has to be customized to reflect the learning cultures of Belize. Belize is a multicultural society, right? We have, in our classrooms, we have a great diversity of students, right? Coming from all cultures, who learn differently, who bring different indigenous knowledge, who bring different capital to the table. And we think that if STEM is going to be take root in Belize in a meaningful way, then it has to be done in a culturally relevant. It has to be dealt. Has to be developed in a community-based kind of way, right? And what this workshop is about, and we have teamed up with Dr. Naomi Waite and her team from New York, from the University of Buffalo, who are really, really deeply involved in STEM education and STEAM education in the United States. As a matter of fact, she was telling me this morning that they have just gotten a $2 million US grant to do STEAM education in the Buffalo community where they live.
So it's also new in the United States?
STEM or STEAM?
Yeah.
Well, STEM has been around for a long time, right? The National Science Foundation was the organization that sort of coined the term STEM, and it was with the intention of bring attention to the study of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics broadly, right? Because once you start to get into those disciplines, when you start talking about science, you have all the subdisciplines in the sciences, right? For example, you can do chemistry, you can do genetics, you can do astronomy. So those are more specialized subdisciplines. So we think of science broadly, of course, right?
Yeah.
And similarly for engineering, you have all the different studies in engineering that you can. So STEAM, though, is sort of a more recent concept, perhaps in the last 10 years, where the researchers have started to sort of expand this notion of what it means to do STEM, because the arts being a creative endeavor, for example, have share many of the components of what we would do in science, for example. And so it's actually to give our young people and our students the opportunity to bring those identities into how they're learning science. So if you're an arts person, that's creativity, that's innovation that you can now use in terms of how you're thinking about scientific investigations or the kinds of questions you're posing. So there is a lot of value to thinking the arts as part of this. But I will also say, for the context of Belize, what we should also be thinking about is for agriculture. The researchers in Japan have started to bring attention to the importance of agriculture. Especially when we think about food security, future food security, the ways in which communities are cultivating food, and that's a science endeavor, right? And we know there was a time in Belize, especially where Galen University is located, which was
agriculture is now
hub.
being tied in with science and technology.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, it's no longer just tilling the soil. You can
Exactly.
they're teaching you to grow a plant on a wall, for instance.
Exactly.
But I want to come back to the cultural aspect of this, because we do a lot of business degrees in Belize, and that comment has come up before, why everybody does business. Because it's the easiest one to do, basically. When you start to get into science and technology and so on, there is Dr. Barrow, I think you're right about looking at the cultural aspect of this. Because worldwide, America, for instance, is falling behind in technology, behind countries like India. I think the Indian Institute, the MIT of India, is more qualified than the MIT in the United States.
That is true.
But of course, Indians live in a different culture. They more technology minded. I guess, is it? Do you have to change your way of thinking to study under STEM or than just a basic academic degree? I look at it now. I'm too old now and I can't do it. But I would never have been a STEM student. I don't think I had the ability to do math and these things to depth. Those were my weakest subjects.
You're never too old, Mr. Vasquez.
No, but
and especially like how they have extended it to include STEAM. You have been in this creative endeavor of the arts all your life. But for us, from our perspective, the success of a STEM initiative in Belize will depend a lot on the teachers. And a lot on the teachers' understanding of not only what effective science teaching is, as to how to teach the law of conservation of mass or how to teach the laws of thermodynamics, but also how to understand the importance of teaching those things to a diverse population in the classroom. So that is one of the important things that this workshop is.
That's right.
Is
That's right. Dr. Wade comes in
to center them on that. But secondly, and probably equally important, is that we believe that the role of the teacher, the modern role of the teacher, is to help the students, right, to think critically, right? It's not just about regurgitating and memorizing scientific facts, but it's to use these patterns essentially in order to become critical thinkers, to become independent thinkers, right, and to really lead interesting, responsible, and what we would consider productive lives, especially in this context where the culture is being influenced significantly by science and technology. And third, and most importantly for us, is that we have to, if this initiative is going to be successful, we will have to refocus, re-anchor, re-moor teachers in this very, very important principle that teaching is an ethical obligation. And to meet that ethical obligation, teachers have to become advocates for all, including advocates for the students. Right? We think that is very, very, very important.
And I think that's where Dr. Wade comes in.
Wade comes in, yes.
Yeah, Doctor. Well, the workshop is for who specifically?
The workshop is for secondary science teachers. That was our target. We also have upper primary teachers as well. Since yesterday, we also have some teachers who are not science teachers, but they want to understand more about this idea of how do they teach to incorporate the culture of the students that they're teaching, right? So currently, those are the teachers that we're serving.
Where, when?
So it's happening. We started yesterday. So yesterday was our first day. We are here for 3 days to Wednesday, and it's at Galen University. This workshop is actually funded by the NARS, which is the Global Organization for Research in Science Teaching. They gave us a small grant to be able to come and do this work, and we partnered, of course, with Galen University to be able to do this.
What's your approach? I mean, we talk about the cultural and all that.
Yes.
How are you delivering this message?
Yeah, so when we think about culturally responsive science teaching, right, it really is about focusing on the assets of who our students are. So we focus on who are our students, which means, racially, ethnically, linguistically, what languages do they speak, what's their cultural background, what's their environment that they're coming from. For example, are they coming from, do they live in the city versus do they live in the villages or rural areas? So all of those components so we're focusing on all of those components when we say who students are. That's the first part. And then the second is what knowledge are they bringing to the classroom? Because all of our students bring knowledge to the classroom, especially as it relates to science, right? And so we're tapping into that, and we're using those as assets, as opposed to this idea that our students come to the classroom with no knowledge, or they come as empty vessels, which is not accurate. In fact, they come with so much knowledge. And many times there are some concepts that our students they know more than we do as teachers, right? So, but we never sort of pay attention to that and think about the ways in which they can be assets. They bring those assets to the classroom, but they can also be assets for how we're teaching. Having said that, how do we do that, right? So, so what that involves is how are we designing lessons? How do we design lessons where we're teaching very concepts like, say, in biology, photosynthesis, which is a concept a phenomena that students learn about their entire educational career. How are we teaching about photosynthesis in a way that students understand what are the outcomes of that process, right? And yesterday, for example, we brought in a piece of firewood, and a piece of firewood is really sort of asking our students, like, having our teachers think about what's this thing that, where does this mass come from, this wood that you're holding in your hands? And it's essentially the outcome of photosynthesis, which is carbon molecules packed really tightly together. But that's what they learn in an equation format and a definition format. But we are giving them the tools to be able to make that really concrete for students. So when a student is in a test, for example, what they will remember and recall are those things that they tangibly held, and the investigations that they could really manipulate, that they could see. So it becomes really concrete for them. So for us, it's designing those lessons that take into account paying attention, brainstorming. So like starting the class to find out what your students know about a topic.
Well, you're dealing with teachers who obviously have already some training or
Yes.
some teaching background.
Yes.
But applying what you taught them now to younger people with less life experience, less knowledge, the approach remains the same?
For teachers.
So from the teacher now going back to their classroom.
Yes, because we're working with teachers, right? So we're modeling for teachers what this could look like. And it's the intention is for our teachers to be able to use these tools and use them in the classroom. So one as I said, one big part of that is the planning phase. How are we designing lessons? Where in the lessons are we incorporating these pieces of the culture? Where in the lesson are we incorporating the components that are linguistic, for example? Language is such an important part of science. And how are we getting our students to move from what their first language is to the scientific language? Because many times we don't think of science as science is another language.
Yeah.
Just like we are learning Spanish, just as we are learning French, science is a new language that students are learning. And if they haven't been immersed in that language, it's going to take time for them to acquire that scientific terminology over time.
But you do the old schooling of you're not academically inclined, you're more mechanically inclined. Does that still apply? That's why we have IT vets. That's why we will have persons who will sit and write poems. They are not interested in mathematics or just can't grasp it. Like in my case, I had to learn my 12 times tables. So you no longer do that. You no longer have to memorize the 12 times tables.
Yeah. So I'll challenge you with something you said, which is I'm not mathematically inclined or scientifically inclined. Many times it's about the experience we have in the classroom that determines whether we pursue those pathways. And if we create those classrooms where we start to see every child as a possibility, because mechanical doesn't mean, like, if you go, that still involves a lot of science.
It does.
Yeah, so
Of course,
it's
of course.
so we can't say someone who goes to that pathway is actually very scientific. That also gives us that's a STEM person.
So that, I think that's the link
Yeah.
that you're creating. I may think I am limited, but really
Exactly.
you're still doing some
is
of the other one, or
Yes.
or you're still
Yeah.
you're still involved generally, but you still have to find your niche, don't you?
Correct. And that can come over time, right? Of course, we eventually follow a different pathway, but this is what's important for science as well, right? Because I think we miss this: the importance of scientific literacy. Like, how do we understand phenomena? How are we taught to think critically? Like Dr. Barrow said, for example, consider the most recent, still ongoing COVID phenomena. Right? That COVID was a lot about scientific literacy. It's understanding how viruses work. It's understanding sort of the epidemiology of diseases, and for example, we teach about viruses in the classroom, right? That should have been knowledge that our general populace could use. So science has its benefits for, in general, having our citizenry develop scientific literacy in order for them to be able to make sense of phenomena. The truth is that so much of what we do in life is science, right? If we drink coffee, what is happening with our bodies when we consume from a digestion perspective, that's science. So it's the foods we make. We talked about bread making in Belize, bun making in Belize. The fact that your mom is making bread or bun in the kitchen, that what they're really doing is, that's a scientific process. That bread is undergoing. Think about the yeast, right? Using yeast in bread. That's science. That's science that's occurring there.
I get the picture. Of
Yeah.
course, I'm old school, but so how do I compare a typical STEM class as opposed to what I went through? I went to tertiary school. You spend an hour lecturing on biology, then you get an hour lecture on English, then you get depending on your major and so on. What is a day in the classroom with STEM? It all remains the same, all subjects?
No, it's very, very different. Very, very, very different. It is focused on a problem or a challenge, right?
So the teacher walks in the morning and will have challenge your students.
The teacher would have some challenges initially, but ultimately we want the students to bring the challenge. And what the experience is about is trying to use mathematics, trying to use science, trying to use engineering, and
anything to solve that problem.
To solve that particular problem. And in the process, to learn what you need to learn about the factors that is impacting and influencing that particular
And they're
situation.
all involved.
So
nothing
all the
is
students are
isolated
involved.
from the next.
That is
The
correct.
subject before we came in, talking about analysis and assisting people with issues, mental issues, and so on. At the end of the day, it is a science, isn't it? And
Yes.
it has some biology, and you have to be familiar with all these subjects to be able to deliver.
That is
Yes.
that is correct. So it's very project driven, challenge driven, right? And it's about getting the kids them to begin to raise questions, to be able to formulate questions, and to be able to design activities to try and systematically try and solve, try to find answers to the questions.
How do you know you've passed? Is it a final? Yeah. How do you know how they've completed the course and if you're going to, I guess, a certificate or something? How do you know you were successful?
You see, we put this in the context of assessment,
Yes.
so that Dr. Waite is going to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So it's assessment. It's really how we make sense of how students are understanding phenomena and the concepts, right? So for project-based learning or inquiry-based learning, we use rubrics, and it's more about process, right? So we're using rubrics to be able to assess processes like data collection. How did you, what kind of data did you collect? How did you make sense of that data? What is the explanation? Does it support the data that you have? So there is this sort of it's more nuanced kind of assessment and grading versus thinking of number grade. And then here's what's important. It's on a gradient of mastery, right? Because think about real scientists who are doing research in their particular fields. They go through this whole process of being apprenticing with sort of advisors or master scientists before they start doing that work. And so that we take the same idea here with our students, is that we are giving them opportunities to master, which means that there will be points of failure. But points of failure just means restarting the process all over again and trying again. So that's like
a journey.
Correct.
You start with a problem and
Correct.
you arrive at a solution.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how you arrive at it, as long as you get the right solution.
And let me also say, I think, to add to Dr. Barrow's point, is that when we're thinking about science and doing inquiry and thinking culture in this case, it's to give our students the opportunity to do science in the way that scientists do. Traditionally, the way science is taught is learn factual information, regurgitate it on a test, and do well on the test. But in that case, our students aren't getting that real exposure to what it means to do science and what it means to do scientific research. In the process of inquiry, for example, what students are having opportunities to do is engage in that whole process of posing a problem, coming up with a hypothesis, going out collecting data, and then making sense of that data, right? How do you come up with those explanations? That process is really important for future
Is it something like
scientific pathways.
I don't know, an internal debate? When you have a debate, you have the pros and the cons, and you will arrive at a conclusion. Except in science, you can't just decide which is right. It has a specific closure, and it comes to a final conclusion.
Well, that is interesting, because science too is a culture, in the same way as our debate is a part of a language culture. Science too is that,
Right.
and it's not always as open and closed
Or as clear-cut as you think.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Right.
Well,
and
there's a
debates
lot of
can also say that,
hypothesizing and best explanation.
It's a conversation we have to continue. It's really interesting. I could keep talking about it all morning.
Yes, but this workshop essentially is designed to provide
Obviously.
the teachers with some of the tools that they will need in order to successfully implement.
Because it's also a change of attitude, a change of way of thinking, and all that. It's a new thing going on.
Yeah.
Dr. Noemi Wade, thank you for coming in this morning and
Thank you for having
and
me.
making us a little bit smarter today. And the same goes for you, Dr. Barrow. You're a regular guest now, as Galen is
Thank you very much.
promoting its programs, and as it moves forward and educating our people. And if we want to compete in the big world today, we have to think differently. We do. We see that happening all over the world, where we have with AI coming in and all that, and technology that's moving so fast. I mean, social media is a science. So thank you for coming in and joining us this morning.
Well, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so
My pleasure.
much.
And we're eternally grateful for Love FM in partnering with us in getting the information out in terms of what Galen is doing to help with development in the country, especially in the areas of education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We'll be right back, folks. Stay with us. We'll be back with more of what's happening in our country.